Dawn breaks over Karnak. You stand where tourists stand today, listening as the guide points his laser at a row of carved women in linen dresses. "Temple virgins," he says, smiling. "Pure brides of the gods." Around you, people nod. Someone whispers that it must have been an honor. The word virgin does something to the imagination. It smooths over all the sharp edges. It makes your picture safe. Up here, under open sky and golden stone, the story looks clean. The walls talk about purity, music, devotion. The priests carved themselves as guardians of innocence and called the girls holy. Souvenir books repeat the script without blinking. The myth hardens into fact because it is carved deep enough and repeated long enough. But the stone you can see is only half the temple. Now we leave the sunlight, down a narrow stair that smells of dust and old water, past storage rooms and blocked doorways, into the level the tour doesn't show you. Down here, the walls aren't polished. They're practical. No hymns, no kings, no gods, just plaster laid in long, flat bands. You come to a corridor that goes nowhere. No shrine at the end, no statue, just a blank wall closing the path. It looks like a mistake in the architecture until you lift your light. Handprints, dozens of them, small palms and thin fingers pressed into the plaster while it was still wet at the height of a child's shoulders. Some hands are clear and perfect. Others are smeared, as if the girl moved at the last second or tried to pull away. They form a band around the passage, a silent procession frozen in the wall. Between the prints, the surface is scratched with words. Not elegant hieroglyphs for gods to admire, but quick, cramped signs, the handwriting of servants, not scribes. 17 times, in the informal script of everyday speech, the same sentence appears. Mut does not hear us. Mut, the mother goddess these girls were told they served. Protector of children, they said. The official inscriptions call this her house. The priests called the girls her brides. But on the only wall where the girls themselves could speak, they wrote the opposite. She does not hear us. This isn't about mocking belief. It's about refusing to let the men in charge be the only ones who get to define what sacred meant. When you hear Temple Virgin now, you have to hold two images at once. The holy bride in the carvings and the child in the dark corridor, hand flat on the wall, carving a sentence no one was supposed to read. Look, if you're the kind of person who thinks documented history matters more than comfortable myths, you're in the right place. Every subscription to Requiem of Thrones helps us access archives, translate primary sources, and bring voices like these back from silence. Hit that button, then let's go back, because what happened next is worse than you think. You don't start with a temple. You start with a field. New Kingdom Egypt, a strip of green pressed between desert and river. A farmer stands in soil his father worked, his grandfather worked, soil he's been told the gods themselves blessed. But the flood came late last year. The grain rotted in the field. The tax collector still came on time. When the harvest failed, the farmer went where everyone went, to the temple. You have to understand what that means. The temple wasn't just a holy place. It was a bank, a granary, a landlord, an employer, an entire economy wrapped in stone and incense. The temple of Amun at Karnak controlled more land than the pharaoh. Its priests counted cattle, ships, and slaves the way other men counted prayers. So the farmer goes to the scribe's office in the temple precinct. He asks for a loan. A few sacks of grain, a measure of copper, just enough to plant again, just enough to keep his family alive until the next flood. The priests are gracious. The tablet says the gods provide. The scribe dips his reed in ink and writes it out on papyrus in lines as neat as fence posts. Amount, interest, repayment schedule. The farmer presses his thumbprint to the bottom. He walks home believing the gods have helped him. Then the math does what it always does. The Wilbur Papyrus, yes, an actual document sitting in a modern museum, lists hundreds of these arrangements. Acre after acre, mortgaged to temples, interest compounding quietly while the river decides each year who lives and who drowns. One bad season becomes 2, then 3. The debt grows teeth. By the 3rd year, the numbers don't work anymore. The interest has eaten the field. The farmer stands in the doorway of his house, the temple's overseer in front of him, ledger under his arm. "There are options," the man says, like he's being kind. "Give up the land, enter service yourself, or dedicate a daughter." The contract from Deir el-Medina is brutally clear. In year 3 of Ramesses IX, the farmer Amenhe, being unable to repay 15 daben of copper, does give his daughter Neferti to the house of Amun for perpetual service. Her age is noted, 9. Witnesses sign. A seal is pressed. The words, "for perpetual service," are a door that only swings one way. The official language softens it. She will be blessed. She will live in the house of the divine. She will be a pure one, a singer of the god. It sounds like a promotion. It reads like salvation on papyrus. In practice, it is simple. The debt's wiped, the account is balanced, and a child's body has just been converted into temple property, entered in the same columns as cattle and grain. The night they call it purification is the night something else quietly dies. The ritual texts make it sound almost gentle. On the papyrus from a priest's tomb at Abydos, the instructions are written like a handbook. Orderly, precise, clinical. On the day of her entering, the girl shall be bathed in the sacred pool. Her garments shall be removed in the presence of the Wab priests. She shall be examined for purity of body. It sounds like hygiene. It isn't. She is 8 or 10 or 12. They lead her into the temple baths after sunset, when the tourists who will one day marvel at this place are thousands of years away. The water is cold, not holy. It closes over her shoulders as older women scrub her with natron and oil, hands efficient, practiced. They say words about washing away the dust of the world. She hears only that everything she was out there has to go. Then they shave her. Every hair, the text says, that no impurity remains. Her head, her body, everything that marked her as her mother's child falls to the wet stone in soft, defeated clumps. In depictions on temple walls, initiates are shown with neat side locks, stylized and dignified. The reality is more brutal. A small, shivering body, slick with water, stripped of the last visible traces of home. The examination comes next. The manual calls it inspection for blemish. It lists the points to be checked as if the girl were a sacrificial animal: skin, limbs, teeth, womb. The priests stand at a distance. The women move closer, but everyone is looking. They are not searching for disease. They are establishing ownership. This body has been vetted, recorded, and cleared for use. Only then does the mask appear. In the inner room, lit by oil lamps and the thick sweetness of incense, the high priest waits with the gold face of the god over his own. Ram horns curve from his temples, the eyes are blank. He is both man and more than man by design. The girls are brought in a line, the youngest at the front. The text says, "She shall speak the oath before Amun. My body is the property of the god. My will is his will. My womb receives his seed." Property, will, seed. On the page, these are metaphors of devotion. In practice, they are legal terms and biological ones. Once she says those words, nothing that happens to her inside these walls will be called violence. It will be called worship. She doesn't understand every phrase. She repeats them anyway. There is no space in the ceremony for hesitation, no line in the rubric that says, if she refuses, stop. The ritual doesn't imagine refusal. The system doesn't allow it. By the time the lamps are snuffed and the mask is set aside for the night, the transformation is complete. The temple will still call her a virgin. The inscriptions will still praise her purity. But in the only language that matters here, contracts, ledgers, ritual manuals, she is something else entirely. She is a consecrated object, a numbered asset, a holy possession with no right to say no. The crack in the story doesn't start in a temple wall. It starts in a clay jar. 1923, a British archaeologist is working in a basement chamber of the Temple of Mut, in a room no guidebook mentions. It's all foundations and dust, shelves of broken pottery, the kind of place you only reach after you've catalogued everything beautiful upstairs. Behind a thin, false wall, she finds it. A sealed jar, undecorated, deliberately hidden as if someone wanted it forgotten, not lost. She opens it in her field tent that night. Inside are papyrus sheets, folded and fragile. Not the grand hieroglyphs carved for gods and kings, but quick, flowing demotic script, the handwriting of people who never expected a monument. 17 letters. The first is signed by a woman who calls herself Entipet. "In my 12th year of service," she writes, "I was chosen for the monthly choice." Not a miracle, not a rare honor, a choice, a rotation. That month there were 5 girls. The youngest was 8, she says. She wept, and the overseer struck her and said tears were impure. They are taken after evening offerings, when the outer courts are quiet, into the inner sanctuary where the high priest waits with the golden mask of the god over his face. He tells them they are blessed to receive the god's visitation, that their bodies are fields for his seed. You've seen those phrases already in stone. The god's joy, the god's entering, the god's seed. On monuments, they sound mystical. In Tentipet's letter, they are stripped of poetry. "We were not asked," she writes. "We were told." Another letter. "I have borne one child to the god. They recorded it as a blessing in the temple ledger." Another. "Since the visitation, I bleed without ceasing. The physician gives me herbs and says the god is testing me." None of these women expect rescue. They are writing to each other or to no one, trying to make sure their pain is not completely erased. When translations of these letters are shown to senior scholars, some refuse to keep reading. One notes in his diary, "Some truths are better left buried." The antiquities officials seize the jar, call the contents doubtful, and lock them away. It would be easier if the paper trail stopped there. It doesn't. Temple administration lists from Medinet Habu record monthly service in the inner rooms, with groups of named girls rotated on a schedule. Medical ostraka from temple doctors describe remedies for the girl who bleeds after the god's coming, recipes to prevent conception, treatments for torn flesh. Another register notes, "Year 7, 3rd month of inundation, the god's joy fulfilled through 5 servants." No age, no details, just a satisfied line in the accounts. Tentipet's letters supply what the ledgers leave out. The ledgers prove her letters aren't fantasy. Together they show you the real shape of this devotion. Not a few rogue priests in the dark, but abuse written into the calendar, entered into stock lists, scheduled like any other duty of the temple. Another item tallied alongside grain and cattle. Not every girl who entered the temple stayed a victim forever. A few climbed high enough inside the system to put their hands on the levers. In the early New Kingdom, God's wife of Amun sounds like another version of the same story. A woman consecrated to the god, bound to celibacy, living within temple walls. At first, many of these wives were vulnerable too, dedicated young, surrounded by priests, their bodies wrapped in holy language but controlled by men. Then, something changes. Political power shifts south. The temples of Thebes grow rich, then richer than the crown. Pharaohs begin to realize that whoever controls the god's wife controls the temple, and whoever controls the temple controls a terrifying amount of land, money, and soldiers. So they make a decision. Only royal women can hold the title. Daughters of kings, sisters of pharaohs, girls raised in palaces start being dedicated as gods' wives of Amun. They arrive with bodyguards, education, and something most temple girls never had: families who cannot be easily ignored. Shepenwepet, too, is one of them. Dedicated as a child, she spends her entire life inside the religious machine. By the time she is an adult, the title of God's wife has swollen into something immense. She commands troops, manages treasuries, signs decrees in her own name. On temple walls, she stands the same size as kings. One inscription at Karnak, carved near the sacred lake, carries her orders. It doesn't say, "We have been abusing girls." It says, "Impurities have entered the house of Amun. Corruption has stained the order of the gods." The language is careful, abstract, as if the problem were bad incense and not broken children. Then comes the content. Let no girl enter service before her 15th year. Let no priest claim authority over her person beyond ritual duties. Let her family visit her 3 times each year. Let her voice be heard in disputes. It reads like dry policy. It isn't. It's a survivor quietly rewriting the rules that once held her. Shepenwepet can't publicly say, "What was done to us was wrong." She can say, "The balance of Ma'at, divine order, must be restored." So she wraps her reforms in theology, and the stone remembers the results, not the reasons. Other papyri from later periods echo the shift. Letters speak of God's wives who are untouchable, who belong to Amun alone and are not to be approached by priests or noble. The same system that once used sacred language to excuse harm now uses sacred language to build a shield around a very small group of women. And that's the question you can't get away from. Did these reforms lift every girl in the temple into safety? Or did they draw a line between a protected elite at the top and everyone else beneath them, still feeding the machine? When royal gods' wives became lawmakers, they changed the rules. But in a hierarchy built on offerings, someone is always still on the altar. You step back into the hypostyle hall and, for a moment, it works on you again. The columns rise, like stone trees into a sky of carved prayers. Sunlight spills through cracks in the roof, painting bands of gold across hieroglyphs that talk about purity, devotion, eternal order. Tour guides murmur phrases that have survived for 3,000 years. Sacred, chosen, virgins of the god. It's hard not to believe them. Beauty is persuasive. Height is persuasive. When something towers over you, you instinctively assume it knows what it's talking about. That's how the priests won, then and now. They didn't just control land, grain, and labor. They controlled adjectives. Pure, blessed, holy. They wrapped girls in those words the way they wrapped statues in linen, until it became almost impossible to say out loud that something terrifying was happening behind the stone. And when modern archaeology arrived, it often did the same. Early reports talked about devoted maidens, cloistered virgins, priestesses who gladly gave themselves to the god. The language is almost Victorian, and that's the point. It says more about the men writing it than the women they were supposedly describing. Letters like Tentipets were dismissed as too emotional, unlikely to be authentic, while ledgers and temple inscriptions were treated as neutral fact, even though they were written by the very people running the system. Museums followed suit. They put statues of God's wives under soft light, describing them as powerful, independent, and spiritual. They rarely mentioned the contracts that began at 9 years old. They didn't talk about prescriptions for torn children, or corridors of handprints, or a line scratched 17 times into plaster. Mut does not hear us. Modern books still repeat the phrase temple brides like it's harmless, as if the metaphor somehow erases the bodies underneath. We like stories where religion is either luminous or monstrous, saints or demons, nothing in between. A machine that can be both beautiful and cruel at the same time is harder to sit with, which is exactly why it matters. Because the pattern isn't buried in Egypt. It's alive wherever institutions wrap themselves in sacred words to protect the powerful. Whenever someone says, "This is tradition," to shut down questions. Whenever pain is rebranded as honor, silence as obedience, survival as devotion. The hypo-style hall is still here. So are the tour groups, the cameras, the souvenir books. The priests are dust, the girls are dust. But their handprints are still pressed into the stone below your feet, and their words are still sitting in archives people would rather not open. You don't get to stand here and pretend you didn't see them. You've met Tentipet now. You've walked that dead-end corridor in the dark. You've watched how easily virgin can mean safe on one wall and owned on another. The question is what you do with that knowledge when the video ends. Subscribe to Requiem of Thrones, leave where you're watching from, and help keep these buried voices from being silenced again.